blankets. Blankets are a really versatile tool. We can use blankets to help provide cushion, but they can also function similar to the blocks. Let's look at common deviations that are found in seated positions. So in a seated pose, if your hamstrings are a bit tight, you may find that as the hamstrings pull on the hips, it pulls them posterior, which puts this slumping and rounding in the back, which is already not a very good position to be in. Right? This is what I say is our couch position versus our yoga position. We want to be upright, sitting and lifting out of our sit bones, out of our lumbar spine. Now, because the hamstrings are tight, we may need to offer a little bit of support here. That support can come in the way of a blanket. We can take the blanket, slide it underneath the hips, and let the sit bones, or ischial tuberosities, you'll feel those bony prominences right down at the bottom of the hips, they're going to come towards the front end of the blanket and almost kind of start to cascade off of the edge. Best to use the folded side edge of the blanket, by the way. So now we can lift out of the lumbar spine and we get into a much better position for a lot of our forward folding postures, Paschimottanasana, Janu Sirsasana, whatever it happens to be. We've already started in a more stable spot, and so the pose is going to progress in a more stable way. The blankets can also serve as a cushion behind the knees. For example, if maybe you have some knee pain or you've had knee surgery, ACL surgery, you're recovering, you've been approved, of course, by a doctor to be back on your yoga mat. You're going to slide this blanket in underneath the knees, and you're going to sit back that way for something like child's pose. Give you a little bit more lift and a little bit more support. Blankets, similar to blocks, can help bring the ground up for us. Say you don't have a block, but you're going to use a blanket for your chaturanga. If you saw our Sun A video, you saw how a block might be able to be used to help get in the correct position with our elbows and our shoulders, but a blanket might be able to do the same thing. Because we can fold the blankets into so many different shapes and so many different ways, they become a little bit more versatile. So it's almost a must-have. Let's take a look at bolsters as a prop. It's a really good prop, a lot of times for seated or supine positions. It's obviously a little bit thicker, more like a pillow than a blanket. It's like a pre-folded blanket all set up for you. Okay, so how can we apply this to our practice? We can take a bolster for seated postures. Let's say we take a simple seat, we go to sit down, and we notice that our knees are a lot higher than our hips. You know, maybe a position like this. We'd like to have the hips in a more comfortable position, a more open position, where the knees are now in line with or below the hip points back at the pelvis. So as you can see where I'm seated here on the bolster, I'm in a much more comfortable position where the knees can settle down. They're not as scrunched up or as tight, contracted in the body here. So this is one way. What this does is also helps us to lift out of our low back. We want to rise up out of the lumbar spine, get nice and tall, open chest, and we're going to take that into a bunch of seated postures. Let's just say we're going into a seated forward fold, Paschimottanasana. I'm going to take it, I'm going to flip it so that you can see this from the side. I come around here to the side, and we may notice in our practice, or maybe some other practitioners, we may notice this rounding in the spine at a seated position, right, where we kind of slump down into the low back. Tight hamstrings pull on the pelvis, they pull it posterior, round us, and pull us down into our low back. This is a very non-stable, yoga-ish, so that's not even really a word, a yoga-like position with the body. So we want to try and lift up, rise out of our low back, and let that natural lumbar curve come back into play here. So the ischial tuberosities or sit bones come towards the front half of the bolster and kind of spill off of the front so we get that lift. Now we're in a better position to move into our seated forward fold posture. It's also going to end up working the hamstrings a little bit more efficiently, and it's going to help keep our back safe. In a supine position, we might use the bolster to help open up across the front of the chest, or pregnant moms-to-be, expecting moms might use this to help lift, and I'll show that example in just a moment. But this is a really nice support for the back here, and once we're laying on the bolster, we can take the arms out wide, help open the chest. I call it a T shape, and then you can go to a Y shape, and then you can go to an I shape. The I shape is going to be the strongest stretch, right, with the arms extended straight back behind you. And then you can go out to the Y, moves a little bit more from the shoulders to the chest, and then all the way out to the T. Also, you may just take the arms down beside you and just find a more comfortable resting position here, Shavasana-like position. Now those pregnant moms, As you get into second trimester, it's sometimes advised that you not lay on your back for any extended period of time because being completely supine may put pressure on the vena cava, which could constrict the flow of blood or oxygen to the baby. So instead of doing that, we use a bolster with a block, and we're just going to lift the chest up a little bit. So a lot of moms find this to be a much more comfortable position, maybe even with the knees bent. You can take the feet wide, knees come together to touch. The bolster can also be a great prop, similar to the block when working with our chaturanga. We put it in between the hands, running the length of the torso. It gives us a gauge for when we're lowering. We come down. We know the position that we're in here with the elbows and the shoulders in line. It's also a great anchor point to let the hips rest on as you work with your upward facing dog. Instead of having the hips floating in space, which requires more core strength and a little bit more stability to your low back, you can keep the bolster here, supporting the hips so that you can play with the alignment of the hands, the shoulders, and the chest. You can stay right there as you lower back down into a good position for your chaturanga, press up and into your downward facing dog. Okay, so the bolster is a really versatile prop. It's one that's probably underutilized in class, but you might grab it next time you go into the studio, or go ahead and pick one up for your own home practice and start to integrate it into a couple of different postures. You can start with these recommendations that we've gone over here today, and then branch out from there. See how you might integrate it into other parts of the practice as well.